benzoic acid and phenanthrene. Recrystallization is a purification technique used in organic chemistry to purify organic solids out of solution. Purify organic solids in a crude mixture. So the way recrystallization works is that we take the crude substance and put it in a solvent system or a specific type of solvent that it is insoluble at room temperature, but can be promoted to dissolve into the solution at higher temperatures. So once we take our impure solvent and put it into some sort of solvent system, or a specific solvent system, the impurities will go into solution, they'll dissolve into the solvent and remain dissolved in solvent. Whereas when we cool the solvent system, the pure substances will crystallize out of the solution as it cools into room temperature. Because as the system is cooling, the pure substances will decrease in solubility and will nucleate at specific sites where crystals can grow. And these crystals the crystal lattices are shaped and size selected based on the type of substance that is crystallizing out of solution. In today's lab, you're going to be investigating specifically the recrystallization of your benzoic acid and phenanthrene samples that you extracted from last week's lab. So the first thing you're going to want to do is weigh out 0.1 grams of benzoic acid that you extracted from last week's lab and place it directly into an Erlenmeyer flask, which doesn't necessarily need to be pre-weighed. And then you're going to want to collect 3 milliliters of hexane, and you can measure the volume of your hexane using this graduated cylinder, and pour it directly into your Erlenmeyer flask with 0.1 grams of benzoic acid. Swirl it around and make sure to dissolve as much of the benzoic acid as you can, and add it onto a preheated hot plate to help you get the solution. Swirl it intermittently. So once you get all your benzoic acid dissolved, or if you're having troubles dissolving the benzoic acid, you can add a couple more mils of hexane directly into the solution, just to make sure you get that full dissolution of benzoic acid. Make sure not to add more than 10 milliliters of extra hexanes for dissolving the benzoic acid. Otherwise, you'll have a really hard time crystallizing the benzoic acid out of solution. Once all the benzoic acid is dissolved into your hexane solution, your heated hexane solution, set it aside and let it cool to room temperature for approximately 15 minutes. Thank you. While you're waiting for your benzoic acid to cool to room temperature, you can move on to the phenanthrene. So what you're going to want to do is collect 0.1 grams of your phenanthrene that you isolated from last week's extraction lab and pour it directly into an Erlenmeyer flask, just as you did with the benzoic acid. But this time you're going to use a solvent mixture of ethanol and water rather than just hexane. So you're going to start by heating some ethanol in a separate flask and collecting a few mils of hot ethanol and pouring it directly into your 0.1 grams of phenanthrene. Swirl it around. And what you're trying to do is get as much of that phenanthrene dissolved as you can. Hot ethanol, you can heat the solution and stir intermittently until you get all that phenanthrene dissolved into a translucent solution. Then you want to add water to the solution, just a few drops at a time until the solution remains cloudy. too much water. Okay. So now we have a cloudy solution. So once you have a perfectly cloudy solution, after adding water dropwise to it, we want to add minimum amounts of hot ethanol to make the cloudy appearance go away. Just as it did. So now at this point, cooling to room temperature, we should see the appearance of crystals slowly starting to grow. And after about 15 minutes, we'll put this in the ice bath as well. After letting your benzoic acid solution cool to room temperature for about 15 minutes, you let it sit in you take the Erlenmeyer flask and place it in an ice bath. In this case, the ice bath has melted, but it's still really cold. And you let the solution sit in the ice bath for approximately 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, you should see the appearance of your crystals in solution. And at this point, you can begin filtering your crystals from solution. So you set up your filtration apparatus using a Erlenmeyer flask with a side arm attached to it, and grab a rubber gasket that will be equipped with your Buchner funnel. And attached to the sidearm, you can collect a vacuum hose, attach it onto the sidearm flask and into the vacuum port, turn on the vacuum, by pulling air through the system. Okay. And then you can collect a piece of filter paper and put it into the Buchner funnel. Make sure that you clamp your sidearm flask using this clamp here to the metal stands that we have available. This will make sure that while you're pouring solutions into your Buchner funnel, you don't accidentally knock over the sidearm Erlenmeyer flask and ruin everything and possibly break your Buchner funnel. Before you pour your crystals and solution into the Buchner funnel, wet the filter a little bit by using some of this chilled hexane solution. And that'll ensure that the filter paper stays in place while you're adding your solution. Carefully pour it onto the filter paper. Now you'll notice that some of your crystals will stay in the flask, and in order to extract those crystals, take a few milliliters of your chilled hexane solution, pour it around the rim of the flask here. And you can rinse your crystals that are on the filter paper with some chilled hexane just to ensure that you dissolve all of those impurities thoroughly. Once you have your crystals separated from the solution, you can remove the filter paper from the Buchner funnel using a pair of tweezers. So these are your crystals, benzoic acid crystals. Transfer the filter paper onto this water glass and let the crystals air dry for a few minutes. After the crystals have air dried for a few minutes, we'll separate them from the filter paper into this pre-weighed vial and collect the mass of your benzoic acid, of your recrystallized benzoic acid crystals. I'm going to take just a mill or two of our chilled ethanol and water mixture and pour it directly onto the filter paper. This ethanol and water mixture contains 6 milliliters of ethanol and 2 milliliters of water. So now we can pour our recrystallized phenanthrene crystals and solution through the filter paper. And just to make sure that we get as much of those impurities off the sample as possible, we're just going to rinse it with some of our chilled ethanol and water solvent mixture. Make sure you turn off the vacuum before trying to lift the Buchner funnel out of your filtration setup. And try to remove these are your phenanthrene crystals, by the way, that have been isolated from solution. And try to lift your filter paper out of the Buchner funnel and onto this watch glass. Let your recrystallized phenanthrene crystals air dry for about 5 minutes before you place your crystals in a pre-weighed vial so that you can take the difference of the mass of your crystals plus vial and ultimately end up with a mass of your collected recrystallized